All right, so buckle up because we're diving deep into American politics today, like really deep. We're trying to figure out what's behind Trump's wins in 2016 and 2024. And to get there, we're going to break down this super interesting conversation between Lex Fridman and Saagar Enjeti, the political commentator. You might have heard it. It's from the Lex Fridman podcast.
Yeah, it's a long one. We're going to pull out like the juiciest parts, the stuff that really helps us understand this whole MAGGA thing, like why it connected with so many people and what it means for, well, for all of us, really.
Exactly. And right away, Saagar drops this bomb. He says Trump is, get this, the most transformative political figure since FDR. That's a huge statement.
It is. He's basically saying that, think about it, an entire generation has only known Trump at the center of American politics.
Wow, yeah.
He even talks about how there was this global thing happening, like voters everywhere were rejecting the establishment, what he calls an anti-incumbent wave. And that, he says, played a part in 2016.
Okay, so there's this global backdrop. But then he gets into something even more interesting, right? Like the culture wars happening here in America.
Yeah.
He calls it the Great Awakening.
Yeah. And this is where it gets kind of controversial. See, Saagar's argument is that the Democrats, they shifted. They moved away from, like, bread and butter issues, the stuff that matters to working class folks, and they went all in on identity politics and social justice. This wokeism, he says, it's affirmative action. It's what he sees as forced representation in movies and TV shows. It's even the shift from, like, everyone gets an equal shot to everyone ends up with the same results. You know what I mean? From equality of opportunity to equity.
Okay, so now we're getting to the heart of it.
Yeah.
How does this Great Awakening, as he calls it, connect to Trump's appeal?
Well, Saagar claims that if you look at the numbers, Trump actually isn't this, like, racially polarizing figure. His support came from a multiracial working class base. He's saying the real dividing line wasn't race, but education.
So, like, people with a college degree were more likely to vote against Trump, while folks without one were more likely to vote for him.
Exactly. And his point is that a huge chunk of the white working class, they felt like the Democratic Party just left them behind. Like, they were too busy with all this work stuff to actually care about their problems, and that's how Trump got them.
Makes sense. Now, he brings up this book, Born Fighting, by Jim Webb. Familiar?
Oh, yeah. It's a deep dive into the history of Scots-Irish people in America and how they shaped the culture. Saagar loves it because it talks about how, like, self-reliance is a huge Scots-Irish value, and also this distrust of authority, a real screw-you attitude towards the elites.
Gotcha. And he links those values directly to how the white working class voted. They went from Obama in 2012 to Trump in 2016.
Right. It's like this group who'd always been Democrats suddenly felt ignored, maybe even looked down upon by this, like, woke elite. And Trump, with his, his whole style being loud, being an outsider, he spoke to that anger and frustration in a way other politicians just didn't.
So while all that global stuff was happening, it was this cultural shift here in America, this Great Awakening, that really set the stage for Trump. And his ability to connect with that frustrated working class, that's what sealed the deal in 2016.
Totally. And then we get to what Saagar thinks about Biden. He doesn't hold back. Says Biden could be the second worst president in modern history, and he blames it on what he sees as, Biden losing it mentally.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty harsh. Is it just, like, policy differences, or is there more to it?
Well, he really goes after Biden's personality, contrasting him with George W. Bush. He actually thinks Bush is the absolute worst, mostly because of the Iraq War. But what's interesting? He says all politicians have to be a little, well, ambitious, maybe even a little narcissistic to get to the top.
Yeah, it makes you think, right? Like, what does leadership actually do to a person?
Totally. But moving on from Biden, let's get into something that's really important to the MAGGA crowd, immigration. Saagar's super vocal about this. He wants less immigration, and he wants to prioritize Americans, like put them first.
And it's not just some abstract policy thing for him, right?
Yeah.
He brings his own experience to it.
Right. His parents were immigrants. They came from India. So he knows the struggles, the sacrifices, but he also thinks it's crucial to, like, embrace American values, assimilate into the culture. And he's not a fan of this whole multiculturalism trend. He thinks it makes us less unified, more divided.
So he sees assimilation as the key to, like, holding on to a shared American identity.
That's it. He's saying welcome immigrants, absolutely, but they also have a responsibility to integrate, to become part of the fabric and contribute to, to the whole.
Yeah, it's tough, right? How do we celebrate all these different cultures and still maintain a sense of unity?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one America's still wrestling with. But let's bring it back to Sagar's take on Trump and this whole Meiji movement.
I was just thinking, we've talked about all the stuff that led to Trump's rise, the culture, the politics, but what about Trump himself? Like, what's Sauger's take on his personality, his leadership?
Yeah. He's obsessed with Trump, honestly. Like, he describes him as this larger-than-life character, a total showman who loves attention and breaking the rules. He gets that Trump style, all that brash talk. It turns a lot of people off. But he also says that's a big part of his appeal.
Yeah, the whole love him or hate him thing.
Totally. And what Sagar's saying is that Trump has this ability to tap into people's feelings, like their anger, their frustration, that sense of being overlooked, disrespected by the elites. That's where his power comes from.
Like he's a voice for the voiceless.
Exactly. And whether you like his policies or not, he's definitely shaken things up. He's forced us to look at some hard truths about America, about ourselves.
No doubt.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. But before we jump into what's next for American politics, what all this means for us as citizens, let's pause for a sec.
Yeah, good idea.
Let's rewind and hit those key takeaways from what Saagar is saying. What have we learned so far?
Sounds good. We'll do that in the last part of our deep dive. We'll pull together all the most important insights from that Saagar-Lex-Fridman conversation. And, well, we'll leave you with some final thoughts about what's ahead for American politics and, well, for you. Okay, so remember that galaxy brain theory we were talking about? The one about the 2020 election?
Yeah, the one that claims all these elites, like billionaires, tech companies, the media, all work together to get Biden elected.
Right, exactly. Well, Saagar doesn't really offer any hard proof, but he does talk about some things that make Trump supporters suspicious. Like, think about how much power social media has these days.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And those algorithms, they can totally control what we see, right? Like, they could be used to silence certain voices, certain viewpoints.
It's true. I mean, we've all seen how social media can turn into these echo chambers where you only hear from people who already agree with you.
And that can be really dangerous during an election, right? When people need accurate information to make good decisions. He also talks about media bias, how some outlets maybe, intentionally buried stories that made Biden look bad and played up the ones that hurt Trump.
So it's like, are we really getting the whole story? Or just the version someone wants us to see?
Exactly. You got to be aware that there might be some spin going on, some manipulation. It doesn't matter where the information's coming from. Remember that Roger Ailes quote, "People don't want to be informed, they want to feel informed."
Oh, yeah, that one really stuck with me. It's like, we all want to believe what we already believe, even if it's not actually true.
And it's something we have to be careful of, especially now with all the political fighting. So about that galaxy brain theory, Saagar does think there's something to it. But he also says there's a difference between having concerns about bias and saying the election was straight up stolen.
He's big on evidence,
Yeah.
He wants people to be skeptical of conspiracy theories, especially if there's no proof. It's one thing to question what powerful people are doing, but it's a whole other thing to just throw out accusations without any evidence.
Right, and that's when things can get messy. When we just accept these conspiracy theories without thinking critically, we lose our ability to, have real discussions and debates.
So the galaxy brain thing, it's interesting, but maybe it's more about people not trusting the system than actual proof that the election was rigged.
That's a good way to put it. It shows just how much faith has been lost in, authority figures and institutions. And that's happening all over, not just here in America.
Right. Okay, so let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something Saagar thinks could actually fix some of these problems. DOGE, he calls it, the Department of Getting Everything Done.
Remember, he's using Doge as a joke, like Dogecoin, the cryptocurrency. But his point is that Trump's whole style, like his business background, his impatience with inefficiency, that could be a good thing for government.
So it's about being more focused on results, cutting through all the red tape, and just getting things done.
Exactly. Saagar thinks a Doge could streamline stuff, break down the walls between all those different agencies and prioritize efficiency over, doing things the way they've always been done. He looks at how quickly private companies can adapt and innovate, and he thinks the government could learn a thing or two.
I like the idea, but it seems a little too simple. The government's a massive machine. It's not easy to just change things overnight. There are checks and balances for a reason.
Yeah, you're right to be skeptical. Even Saagar admits it would be tough. He says all those career bureaucrats, they'd fight back. They like things the way they are.
Plus, you'd need Congress to approve it and get the money, and that's a whole other battle.
For sure. So the Doge thing, it's more like a thought experiment than a real plan. But it shows how frustrated people are with government, how much they want it to be more efficient, more focused on actually delivering.
Yeah, you see that desire for big change, but then
Uh-huh.
also this realization that real reform, it takes time. You can't just snap your fingers.
Yeah.
And you have to understand how things work if you're going to actually change them.
Exactly. It's a balancing act that all reformers struggle with, no matter what their politics are.
Speaking of which, Sagar talks a lot about wokeism
Yeah.
and how he thinks it's hurting America. What's his take on that?
He basically defines it as this ideology that's all about identity politics, social justice, and like he thinks it's kind of a divisive way of dealing with past wrongs. He says it's created this culture where everyone's super sensitive, where people are afraid to say what they really think because they might be labeled as racist or sexist or homophobic.
So you're always walking on eggshells, worried about saying the wrong thing.
Right. And he argues that this shuts down real conversation, real debate, which is what a democracy needs to function. He thinks wokeism has gone overboard, that it's more about showing off how morally superior you are than actually fixing things.
But shouldn't we be sensitive to the experiences of people who've been marginalized, who've faced systemic injustices?
Oh, he's not denying that those injustices exist. He knows that racism, sexism, discrimination, all of that, it's real and it needs to be addressed. But he's saying that this woke approach, with all the focus on identity and seeing oppression everywhere, it's not helpful.
So it's about finding that balance between acknowledging what's happened in the past and building a future where everyone feels like they belong, where there's understanding.
Exactly. He thinks that all this talk about division and blame, it's actually preventing us from having those real conversations. It's pushing people away who could be allies and creating a backlash that just helps the very people woke activists are trying to fight.
It's complicated, that's for sure, and it's not going away anytime soon. But let's talk about something a little more personal. Sagar's own background, like how does that influence his political views?
Well, remember, his parents immigrated from India.
Yeah.
And he often talks about how that shaped how he sees things like immigration, assimilation, the American dream, all that.
I bet that gives him a really interesting perspective, especially on the whole immigration debate.
It does. He gets what immigrants go through, the struggles, the sacrifices, but he also really believes in embracing American values, assimilating into the culture. He's not crazy about multiculturalism. He thinks it weakens our national unity, makes us more divided.
So he thinks that assimilation is essential for having that shared American identity.
Yeah, that's the idea. He's saying, welcome immigrants, but they also have to do their part, you know? Integrate, become part of society, and contribute to the greater good.
It's a tough question. How do we celebrate diversity and also have that sense of unity?
That's the one everyone's trying to figure out. But let's get back to what Sagar was saying about Trump and the MAGA movement. We've talked about all the things that led to Trump's rise, but what about Trump as a person? What does Sagar think about his leadership, his personality?
Yeah, good point.
Honestly, he's fascinated by Trump. He calls him this larger-than-life character, a total showman. Loves attention, loves breaking the rules. He knows that Trump's style, all that tough talk, turns a lot of people off. But he also thinks that's a big part of why people love him.
Like, it's the whole you either love him or hate him thing.
Exactly. Sagar's saying that Trump can tap into those raw emotions like anger, frustration, feeling ignored, disrespected by the elites. That's where he gets his power.
It's like he speaks for those who feel like they don't have a voice.
Yeah, and you can't argue he's changed the game. He's made us face some hard truths about who we are as a country.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. And it's not over yet. But before we start talking about what's next for American politics, what this all means for us regular people,
Right.
let's take a step back. Let's go over the main points again, the key things we've learned from Sagar so far.
Good idea. That's what we'll do in the last part of our deep dive. We'll wrap everything up, put it all together, and leave you with some final thoughts about American politics, about what it all means for you.
Okay, so we've really dug into Sagar's view on Trump, this whole MAGA movement, but let's zoom out for a sec. Like, what does all this mean for America? Where do we go from here? Things feel pretty divided.
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And Sagar, he actually looks back at history for some clues. He talks about this idea called thermostatic public opinion. Basically, it means the political pendulum, it kind of swings back and forth.
So, like, if one party gets too powerful, the other one comes back.
Yeah.
Like a correction.
Exactly. He uses George W. Bush as an example. Like, when Bush won in 2004, it seemed like, okay, the Republicans, they're in control. But then just 2 years later, boom, huge swing towards the Democrats in the midterms. And then 2008, Obama wins.
That's interesting. So these shifts, they're more like cycles than we think.
Right. And Saagar's point is, don't try to predict the future too much because things can change so fast. What looks like a sure thing today, it could totally flip tomorrow.
Makes sense. So we shouldn't get too caught up in the moment, right? Like take a step back, see the bigger picture, look at history, and try to understand those deeper forces that are always at work.
That's what he's saying. And his analysis, it gives us some good tools to do that, right? We've talked about how people are anxious about the culture, the economy, how they don't trust the elites. That's what's driving these populist movements, not just here, but all over.
Right, on both sides. And he really made us think about our own biases, Like, get out of those echo chambers and have those tough conversations, even when it's uncomfortable.
He's all about being humble intellectually, being open to hearing different viewpoints and admitting, maybe I don't have all the answers.
And that point he made about politicians, I keep thinking about it. They're just people at the end of the day.
Such a simple idea, but it's so important.
It reminds you we shouldn't put them on a pedestal. No blind loyalty, right?
Yeah, hold them accountable, question what they're doing, demand better. They work for us.
Exactly. So what happens next in American politics? It's not written in stone. It depends on the choices we make, what we do, the conversations we have.
It's in our hands.
So let's be informed, let's get involved, let's listen to each other, learn from each other, and work together, even when we disagree.
It's not about pretending everything's fine or that we all agree. It's about remembering that we're all human at the end of the day.
And building a better future, a fairer one, where everyone has a chance. That's powerful stuff. We've really gone deep on this one, and I hope it's given you a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. See you next time.